In this video, we're going to take a few minutes to talk about what actually is strategy. If you were to look it up in the Oxford English Dictionary, strategy is defined as a plan of action or policy designed to achieve major or overall aims. This is a good starting point definition, but it's pretty broad, not specific to business. If you were to ask Michael Porter, who is a strategist, you'll come across a few of his articles in this class. He defines strategy as the creation of a unique and valuable position involving a different set of activities. Porter's definition takes a few minutes to unpack because you have to understand what is meant by positioning, why it matters that it's unique and valuable, and what kind of activities he's talking about and why they need to be different. So for all those reasons, I prefer this third definition, which is strategy is the set of actions a firm takes to gain and sustain superior performance relative to competitors. So in strategy, you'll hear a lot of analogies to military, to sports, to chess, because all these disciplines have their own form of strategy. And some of these metaphors are completely valid, but I'd mention that in business, a lot of strategy actually derives from economics, because the objectives of a business are more closely related to economic objectives, right? Achieving profitability, outperforming your competitors in a market. It's a little bit different than what your objectives would be if you're talking about the military. When you think about strategy in a business organization, you can conceive of it as a process, right? Plan, execute, measure, adapt, and repeat this cycle over and over again. In large organizations, typically strategy, the ultimate responsibility for strategy, comes from the very top of the organization, the CEO. There's oftentimes a dedicated strategic planning team that emphasizes that first step in that process, the planning piece, and they do a lot of data collection and analysis. Some organizations have general managers that both plan and execute strategy, and virtually every single part of an organization is involved to some extent in executing strategy and measuring performance against a strategy or strategic objective. I know, though, some of you don't have ambition to go work in a large organization, or you have your own entrepreneurial venture, or you're planning on staying in a small family business, or maybe you work in a nonprofit organization. So I'd like to highlight that smaller organizations and non-traditional organizations also need to make strategic decisions. They might not have a strategy per se. Michael Porter is pretty insistent that organizations, he talks about large Japanese corporations can oftentimes function very well because they're very efficient without really having a clear strategy. And we'll get into a little bit more what the difference is between operational efficiency versus strategy a bit later in this class. But small organizations, even if you don't have a strategic plan or a planning team, can benefit from structured strategic thinking in their decision-making process. When we talk about what goes into a strategic plan, it needs to consider the external operating environment of an organization as well as the internal aspects of an organization. What is that organization actually good at? What do they have the capabilities to do? The plan itself should articulate long-term organizational goals as well as medium or short-term objectives, and offer some guidance to coordinate and direct actions across functions. Many organizations are organized into functional areas. You have your marketing team, your finance team. So the strategic plan should be the glue that ties these different groups together. In the parable, I have this picture here of the blind man and the elephant. Each one touches a different piece of the elephant and thinks it's something different. Touch the trunk and thinks it's a snake. Strategy is supposed to be the team that pulls all those blind men together and says, it's an elephant. We want an elephant, okay? We'll make a distinction a little bit later in this class between corporate versus business strategy, but at this point, if I use those terms interchangeably, there's nothing wrong with that. We're just talking about strategy in the context of a business organization. So what goes into a strategic plan? I told you what comes out of it, right? The strategic objectives for an organization and some guidance for coordination. What goes into it? Intuition and experience, perhaps. Data, right? Market data. What's the economy doing? Is our market growing? How are our competitors doing? Our own performance data for our organization. And this is not just financial data, but all sorts of other types of inputs, both quantitative and qualitative. And then how do you take all that information and make sense of it? We oftentimes use tools and frameworks, and we'll spend a fair amount of time in this class learning a variety of different tools and frameworks. There are other ways to make sense of information, expert opinions, for example. So it's not everything has to be based upon a tool or a framework, and of course tools and frameworks are only as good as the data that goes into it and the analysis that comes out of it. So I have the SWOT, an example of a SWOT diagram next to this, but I'll tell you in terms of strategic planning, a SWOT is perhaps not the best tool. It is a better tool a bit later in that strategy process, oftentimes between that planning and execution step where you need to communicate strategy. Speaking of communicating strategy, I wanted to talk a little bit about a strategic statement and what is a strategic statement. So a strategy statement is a brief summary of a firm's strategy. Companies tend to have different statements of their overall kind of purposes and objectives, a mission statement, a vision statement. A strategy statement is more specific than these things. One of the readings you were assigned, the Collis and Ruckstad reading, talks about the three aspects of a strategy statement. It's objective, aim, and advantage. And these kinds of statements are really helpful to communicate the strategic plan to those who need to execute it. As well as if you're an organization and you want to explain to investors, even if you're a small organization and you're just explaining to, your dad because you're asking him to lend you money to help grow your business, having a strategy statement that you can use to express where your organization is going and how you plan to get there is a very useful tool. So that's why we spend time at the onset of this class talking about how to communicate strategy. So Collis and Ruckstad tell us there's those three elements: objective, aim, advantage. In a more kind of practical sense, typically after I read a strategy statement for an organization, I should understand the basics of the kinds of products and or services an organization will produce, where geographically they might compete, the basis on which those products will compete with competitors, and the types of resources and capabilities a firm needs to implement that strategy successfully. So one warning about strategy statements, something I see commonly is students rely on these very big picture mission statement type statements. So I give the example here: create value for shareholders by selling the best widgets. This isn't really the level of specificity that allows me to, as an outsider, to understand what you're doing at a company, or how you really plan on getting there, or what the specific target is. Or if I were an employee, I'd still be like, well, I don't really know what you want me to do with this. So there needs to be aspects of the strategy statement that are time-bound and measurable. And that's why there are different kind of general statements about corporation's purpose, mission, vision, as well as a strategy statement, because the strategy statements do change. A company may have the same mission for its entire existence, but it may have a different strategy. And so when we're looking at a strategy statement, there is kind of a medium to long-term objective there, but we're looking usually at a time frame of 3 to 5 years. So in this example, a better statement might say something like, become the US's leading low-cost manufacturer of widgets by developing the most efficient operating processes and outsourcing all non-essential functions within 3 years. So I know the time frame, I know how they're going to get to that goal. I also know what their goal is. Becoming the leading low-cost manufacturer, even that can be a little bit opaque as to what that means. So I've specified here top selling. They're going to measure leading in terms of sales. So think about that as you consider writing a strategy statement or communicating a strategy.